Welcome to another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric and Tour de Fleece 2023. I am starting a little bit later in the day than I usually do. I have an extra fan going to try to keep this little area cooler and keep my glasses from fogging up. I made the mistake of going outside and thinking, oh, I could probably record a little video. Take the wheel out and it would be fine. I did a little test, and while the microphone does mute out the mowing services all in the neighborhood around us, it doesn't do anything to help reduce the humidity. And we've been having high temperatures and a lot of afternoon rain. The ground was really quite wet. So I don't know if I would have wanted to take my wheel out. I've taken the wheel out in the first year that I did Tour de Fleece vlogging. I took my wheel out into the wet grass, but it is so humid. It wasn't worth it. But the problem is now my glasses keep fogging up. So I have a fan on. I don't think it's being picked up by the microphone, but I thought I'd just mention, hopefully we're not getting a buzzing sound. So with all that background information, let's go ahead and get spinning. I am hoping maybe tomorrow morning I'll feel like going outside and trying again. We'll see. It is supposed to, again, get quite warm and rain. So it may just be not in the cards for this Tour de Fleece. So we're back to, after a day of rest, we're back to a topic. And today's topic is yarn for weaving. Excellent topic. Let's just start from the beginning by telling you I am not a weaver. While my daughter has taught me the basics of weaving, and I have studied the information of weaving in order to help her when she was, some basic information to help her when she was getting started, because she was still in her early teens when she started weaving on a floor loom. We ended up getting a rigid heddle loom, I think secondhand. So she had that, but her first loom was a floor loom, a 4-shaft floor loom, and she really loved weaving. It was she connected with it in a way that she hadn't connected with other fiber arts at that time. She knew how to crochet, she knew how to knit, but she really connected with weaving. I think she really enjoyed doing things that her mother didn't do. But eventually she did get me behind the loom, helped me warp up a loom just before she was headed off to college. Oh my, and I even bought a small table loom for myself, because what we discovered is I have a hard time getting my hands and feet to coordinate when it's at a loom. So by taking away the foot action, we thought it might help. But in the end, the truth is it just was never comfortable for me to weave. It might be different today where I now have so much more access to something to watch while I'm working, but I suspect in the end it's still something that, sorry, my knee itches, probably from going outside in the bugs. For me, I think that with everything that I do, there has to be a balance between the enjoyment that I get and the physical strain that it puts me under. And weaving tends to put me under a physical strain that is greater than the joy that I get from the task. So while I am not a weaver, I have been exposed to weaving. In fact, I was going to do a little bit more research, knowing that this topic could come up. I was going to do a little bit more research. I did some research when I was writing up my notes, but I have since obtained a new old book on weaving, and I was going to take a look at this and see what kind of information it's a book on the weaving, spinning, and dyeing book, and it's a book that was published back in 1978 and in 1983 by it was put together by Rachel Brown. And I was going to go through it and see if there was any extra things that could add to the notes that I found. But I think overall, the stuff that I'm seeing in here for the most part is stuff I've already sourced in other books. But it's always fun. It's always fun to add new old books to your collection. I find just being able to compare the way things were talked about before, the way things are talked about now, are very interesting. And you sometimes find little gems that may get left out of a more modern publication. And yes, I agree. 1978 is not that long ago. But as the memes that keep popping up talking about, we're now closer to this than that, that show up all the time. Yes. When you start to near the half-century mark of time having passed, it does kind of fall into being a little bit old. And that book is nearing its half-century mark. Yes, so the milestones of life. As a historian, 50 years is a very short amount of time, it seems. But as a human being, 50 years is a long time of being. All right, back on topic. Oh, before I delve into talking more about weaving, or I should say spinning yarn for weaving, I am spinning up some more of the CVM. The sheep's name is Ying, and it's the same as that I did all this dyeing up the other day with, and I'm spinning it up. This is the second bobbin of the undyed, and all I'm doing is filling the bobbins. As soon as the bobbin is as full as I feel comfortable, I'm not doing it over full because there's no purpose. I'll fill a bobbin, and when all of my fiber is spun, then I'll apply the bobbins together. That's, for me, a really great way of busting through a bunch of fleece at one time. If you have enough bobbins to do that with, it's a great way of mixing up your bobbins so that I saw somebody talk about if you want to apply together like 1 and 4 and 2 and 5 and 3 and 6 type situation, so that you get a little bit more overall consistency. It helps compensate for variables in your spinning from bobbin to bobbin is the idea. So I do it because it's just an easy way to spin and enjoy the spinning. I don't know how much of any of this spinning is showing up. I'm always amazed at how much does actually show up when I go to putting the videos together. I think you've seen me spin long draw enough at this point that you're probably just, for today, here to hear the topic and have company while you yourself spin. The interesting thing I'm going to say is when I carded, I've just grabbed clumps of fleece. I haven't worried about the color, and so I have a varying arrangement of color in this fleece, this naturally colored fleece. But occasionally, like the white that or the very light colored, I'll get a stripe. I get a patch of a really light or of a really dark section, and it should make the final yarn quite interesting. It's not going to be a striping effect. It's going to be patches of different color, and it may, if it coincidentally matches up with another patch of the similar color, then you'll have a patch in the yarn. Otherwise, it will be a barber pole and more muted. It may not be a technique everyone enjoys, but I find it to be a very pleasant spin and a very pleasant yarn to knit with. I don't mind the kind of, I guess, rustic or haphazard nature of the yarn and the product I knit with it. And as I said in one of the earlier videos where I was showing this fiber, I am spinning to make a sweater for my husband. Unlike the bulky sweaters that I've done in the past, I am planning to do a more fitted, top-down, potentially raglan. I think I'll probably do raglan as opposed to a yoke. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how what the whim of the day strikes me when it comes time to put it on the needles. But I'm planning to make him a more fitted item, and as you notice, I have color. I'm planning to put a little bit of simple color work into it. So we'll see. I'm sure I'll share it in a vlog at some future date. But back to the topic of today, which is spinning yarn for weaving. The spinning that I'm doing right now would be wonderful if I were using it as a weft. So for those of you who are spinners but not weavers, really simple breakdown. In weaving, the long fibers going up and down are the warp threads. They have to be under tension usually. Yeah, actually almost always. I think peg loom, well, even on a peg loom, there's under tension. And then you have the horizontal. So the vertical is the warp, and the horizontal is the weft. And the weft does not have to be under as much tension. The weft is added into the, woven into the warp threads, so it doesn't have as much abrasion on any one section, whereas the warp threads can have repeated movement of heddles going past it. So the warp threads need to have a little more care than the weft threads, because they are under tension, and they are in essence the skeleton, I guess you could say. Oh, that's actually, I like that. They are the skeleton, and the weft is the flesh. I guess that kind of helps. I'm not sure. So, if you're new to spinning or weaving, the idea of spinning a yarn specifically made, I'm reading my notes here, made for the weaving process may seem daunting. It can especially, now, if you're going about it and no one's ever told you that, oh my goodness, you have to be careful of this or that or the other, you may not be daunted. You may dive right in and just say, well, why can't I do it? In my case, the historian in me said, well, people were weaving and spinning and weaving their own textiles long before we had commercial, so there must be a way to do it. So I was not daunted in that sense. Only thing that was daunting to me was, at the time, I was still quite a very new spinner. So I'm a very new spinner at the same time my daughter is a very new weaver. Neither one of us had had an extensive knowledge on the subject. We didn't have as large of a library as we currently do. And so my only thing that caused me a little bit of trepidation was making sure that my singles, because I wanted to use singles, that my singles would be strong enough to not break. My daughter will tell you that I succeeded mostly. I was using a fleece that was from a crossbred Corriedale Lincoln sheep. So it had the properties of the Corriedale, but it had a little bit longer staple length than the Corriedale usually had, from the Lincoln, which falls in the long wool category. And it was a wonderful, it made it easier. It just happened to be one of the fleeces that I had purchased that year. So it really worked out. We had no idea how much I was supposed to spin, so I just spun and spun and spun and spun. Lots of different colors. I've mentioned in other in other vlogs that I still have some of that fiber that I tend to use to ply with art yarn occasionally. But my daughter did manage to weave with it, and she did create a finished garment with it. So my trepidation was making sure that I had yarn that did not have would not break easily. That led me to, in some cases, over twist the fiber. And she did tell me that that did cause her issues at times, where it would, even after it relaxed, the curliness of it, the kinkiness of the nature of the yarn did sometimes have an issue with going through the heddles. And I would imagine that added extra abrasion and could lend itself to weak areas. So that was our experiment. We were successful. We learned a lot from it. And that, I think, is the really fun point, is that, you know, you can learn from trial and error. You can also learn by reaching out to other people and asking them what they think. And one of the things that we found out during the process is there would have been a way to, now, the yarn that we used, we had to let it relax on the bobbin, but there would have been a way for us to make it even easier for it to go through the heddles being the thing the warp go through that make it so you can adjust the pattern, lift up, and make a opening. If you watch anybody show you basics of weaving, you'll know you have to have a place to run it through, because unlike when we were in elementary school, we're going up and down manually, or and there is times in which you might do that. In weaving, it makes it a lot easier if you can open up a huge section, a big gap between a huge section of your warp threads, and run the shuttle of your weft threads through. It makes it easier if you can do a lot at once rather than pick 1, 2, 3, 4 type situation. Okay, so there is a way that you can help control, okay? And it's a simple term, and it's a fairly simple technique. It's called adding sizing to your yarn, and I'm going to refer to singles. I mean, you can certainly weave with plied yarn, okay? But I'm just going to refer to singles because it's, I think, a more traditional way, and it means you don't have to spin quite as much. So if you put sizing, and you can think of it in clothing, new clothing comes with sizing in it. It's what you put in to create a slightly blocked, finished looking garment in order to make it look good. It is oftentimes a light starch. So unlike a heavy starch stiffness, sizing gives a little bit of stiffness, but the most important thing I think that it does for the weaving yarn is it contains all the fuzzies. So while I am spinning this woolen, and that's not probably the best way to spin, I think a worsted spun is probably a better way to make your warp thread, simply for the fact that you're making right from the very beginning smoother yarn. If I wanted to take this specific yarn and use it as a warp, by putting sizing on it, all of the fuzziness that is more typical in a woolen spun, woolen prep and woolen spun yarn, that fuzziness would be tamed. Think of it like basically putting a little bit of a coating to hold everything in place, kind of like hairspray on our hair. It holds it a little bit in place. So what we're trying to do is make a smooth a smooth finish to the yarn, protecting it with a little bit of a coating. And of course, sizing, you can purchase sizing, but you can also make sizing on your own. And there are recipes, if you Google sizing for yarn, you can run into some different recipes. Some of the stuff that I saw come showing up is sizing can be made from water-soluble glues or starches. The sizing is washed out. That's the intent, and that's important. Water-soluble, because you want the sizing to wash out after you have finished your weaving, so that the cloth doesn't have that in it anymore. The hand-woven finished item doesn't have that sizing in it anymore. So water-soluble. So yeah, there's recipes that you can find talking about how to make your own sizing for your weaving yarn. And I've talked about in other videos about how I personally, unless I'm dealing with something like Angora, I personally like to full up my yarn when I set the twist. I don't just soak it, but I also agitate it just a slight bit to make it puff up and fluff up, and not enough to felt it, but enough to really make it come to life. And I don't do that on my Angora because I want, unlike if I were trying to sell it and want it to look pretty and fluffy, I want it to actually stay contained a little bit more until I've finished making whatever the garment is. And then I'll let it bloom and halo all over the place. When you're doing weaving, you kind of want to treat all your yarns that way. You want to keep them, a little more contained so that the fulling process, the fluffing up process, happens when you've taken your woven product off the loom, okay, your fabric off the loom, and you full that fabric, because then all that fluffing happens under the tension and pressure of those woven together strands. And if you imagine it, all of a sudden you could see little gaps, all of a sudden those gaps get full. And that's why we want to do the fulling of the fibers when we do the fulling of the fabric. Now, that's not to say that as the weft yarn goes through, we can't use big, fluffy, chunky yarns to make a different look and different textile. Of course you can, but it certainly helps if those warp threads are nice and smooth, slick, and the process of them fluffing up happens when your fabric is made, because then they'll help fill in all the holes and you'll have a nice, dense, and in some cases, depending on the wool that you're using, thick, fluffy product. My daughter and I played around with that a little bit, where we took it was commercially spun, but it had felting properties, and we slightly felted her woven wall hanging. It was amazing how thick and fluffy it became. And I've seen some traditional weavers in, I believe they were in Ukraine, or on the border with Ukraine, and they were showing a traditional way that yes, their weft that they put in were huge. I mean, almost not quite my arm thick, but big, chunky, roving, almost thickness of singles that were being woven in. But their whole entire purpose is that they felt, oh my goodness, I just got a flat tire. My, the leathers holding my footman to my treadle just broke. So, but I was going to finish saying, so what they did is after they used these big fluffy warp threads, then they would felt and felt and felt and felt. And they ended up with these thick rugs. Then on one side of the rug, they took carders, just like our hand carders, and they brush and brush and brush, and all that fluffy fiber, which is now caught in the threads, would fluff up, and you had a side of your rug that was full and fluffy and hairy, and I just thought it was wonderful. So weaving with our hand spun can bring a whole new world. We don't have to only make traditional fabric for clothing. We can play around. We can have fun. And a lot of these different breeds of sheep that may not be next to skin soft, all of a sudden their properties are highlighted in such a wonderful way when we take them over to weaving. So don't be afraid to use your spinning in a weaving project. Don't be afraid to spin specifically for weaving, and don't be afraid to spin for the singles that are needed for the warp. You can do it, just do it with a little bit of research and care. When you're making those warp threads, look for a strong, long wool, and again, some of those long wools, they will felt. So look for a feltable, long wool that you can spin into a single. If you need to, put some sizing on it to tame the twist, to tame the fuzzies, and then have fun. This is another wonderful way, besides crocheting cat toys, this is another wonderful way to try to use up some of your art yarns that you do during challenge days. You can have a lot of fun making, maybe you don't want to make a whole rug. You can get a peg loom. Those are really one of the easiest ways to do some weaving. Get a peg loom and weave yourself a pillow cover. Make one side for one side of the pillow, make another for the other side. Or one side you're weaving and the other side is some commercial fabric that you bought. Either way, I recommend that if you're trying to find a way to use your, especially those challenge spins, dive into a little bit of weaving. Because while I am not the weaver in the family, I have had enough success. And I do have a little lap loom that I have had better success with. Just not enough time. So I'm going to end now, and I'm going to fix fix my flat tire. I hope you're having a wonderful day unwinding with a little bit of fiber and fabric, spinning, and enjoying this Tour de Fleece 2023. Until tomorrow, happy spinning.